Carbon Trace Productions is a non-profit documentary film studio in Springfield, Missouri. It is a dual mission, documentary education and humanitarian service. The work we do is primarily about teaching students the art of documentary filmmaking, while at the same time serving the community by telling stories of compelling social importance. I talked to Dr. Andy Cline, the founder of Carbon Trace, about its beginnings, its impact, and its mission.
Well, Carbon Trace has kind of an odd sort of a history. It began really as just a group of individuals, kind of the blind leading the blind. I decided I wanted to learn how to make documentary films, and I asked some students that I know to help me do that. I had not made a video more than about 1 minute 30 seconds to that point. This was 2014. Most of the students that started helping, we were journalism majors and just a couple of digital film majors who did not have documentary experience. And we kind of muddled through, and we needed, to call ourselves something. We needed to have a name, production company name. And at the time, I was writing a blog about bicycling and urban living called Carbon Trace. My other blog that I'd been writing for a long time was called Rhetorica. Well, that didn't make sense, but Carbon Trace kind of did, because I was getting across the idea of carbon neutrality, or a path or a journey towards carbon neutrality, hence the word trace. Basically I went looking to the thesaurus and tried to come up with something cool. And so I just picked, we'll call ourselves Carbon Trace Productions. At the time we were working on our very first film, which was a feature documentary called Downtown: A New American Dream, which had an environmentalist, new urbanist component to it. So Carbon Trace seemed to be a good name for the effort. An interesting thing happened on the way to finishing that film, or just after the finishing of that film. I set out with a goal to learn to make a feature-length documentary. What is that like? What skill sets do you have to have? What makes that occur? I wanted to learn. And I knew I wanted to enter it in a very specific film festival. At the time, it was called the New Urbanism Film Festival. Its name has been changed to the Better Cities Film Festival. And I wanted to win something. So those were my 3 goals. And along the way, we made every mistake you could make. We did every boneheaded thing you could do. We made stuff up as we went along, and we learned a lot. And in the fall of 2016, we finished Downtown. It got accepted to the New Urbanism Film Festival, and we won a category award. Boom, 1, 2, 3. I'd done what I wanted to do. And so at an after party, once we got back to Missouri State, after having been to LA for the film festival, I was kicking back, having a beer, all the crew was around, having fun, because I'd done what I wanted to do. And then one of the students, it was Tay, who is is one of our former board members and is now a professional volunteer who works out of Oakland, California, and has been instrumental in really every project. He pipes up with, well, what's next? Right? Well, all of a sudden, I've got a room full of students looking at me. What's next? I hadn't thought about what was next. I'd done what I wanted to do. If we had done nothing more after that, that would have been cool. But I had all these students looking at me, with expectation in their eyes, and so I was like, well, I guess we're going to keep making documentary films. Well, we learned that good documentary stories will drop in your lap if people know you do documentary films. And so at the time, the fellow that was the head of the English department at Missouri State had just finished a book about a doctor from Syria who was now an American citizen and working in the United States, about his journey of being in med school. And in fact, he knew Bashir Assad, the dictator in Syria, knew him in med school, and actually worked in his health department for a while he was still in Syria. And Tarif Bakdash, the subject of the book, was briefly at Missouri State University, and W.D. Blackman, who was head of the English department, got to know him and wrote a book about his life as a Syrian doctor come to the United States, and what he had seen in kind of Syria devolving into civil war, and his getting out of there and then practicing medicine here. He's a pediatric neurologist. And so WD gives me a copy of his book and says, I think this could make a good documentary film. Well, yeah, I read the book, and it was pretty interesting. And I thought, yeah, this guy could make a good personality piece. And Tay again stepped up and said, oh, can we please do this? I've met this guy, and he's really awesome. And so we started down that path. And Syrian Doctor is now, it's been a long production cycle. It is now in post-production. That dropped in our lap. Other shorts and things, kind of, people came forward. Zero. Armando Johnson, who's the high school basketball coach at Central High School here in Springfield and also a Spanish teacher. He called up the department one day, the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film at Missouri State, and said, hey, I think, my last year of coaching would make a good documentary. Well, they passed that on to me and said, do you want to talk to this guy? I thought, I'll have coffee and talk with anybody about their story. I think listening to people's stories is important because you never know what's going to happen. Well, on the surface, you got to have a lot of chutzpah to think that your last season of coaching at a high school in Missouri, is of interest to anyone. But the fact of the matter is that Johnson was an interesting guy, and he did have an interesting story to tell. And because I bothered to sit and listen, discovered, yeah, we're going to do a documentary. And it became Zero, our most successful student production to this point, winner of an award of excellence, the only feature-length student documentary awarded anything at the Broadcast Education Association Festival of Arts for 2020. It's an international festival run by the main outfit for professors and schools in broadcast education. That's big. Yeah, so we generate ideas and we sit around and wait for things to drop in our lap because both things happen. Really, it started with Syrian Doctor, which is a working title, by the way. To pay for the main filming, we needed to get to the Middle East, to a refugee camp, to dealing with refugees, because this is what Tarif Bakdash did. He was is a pediatric neurologist here in the United States, but what made him interesting was he regularly returns to the Middle East to work with Syrian refugees. And he works through an outfit called the Syrian American Medical Society, which is a nonprofit group of doctors who try to help in the crisis. This is the outfit that runs those hospitals and caves that keep getting bombed and where doctors and other medical personnel keep dying. They funnel money and medicine and equipment. They also run medical missions to refugee camps in the Middle East and in Europe. And we were lucky enough to go on 2 of those missions. The raw expenses paid for by Syrian American Medical Society because we agreed to do media work for them while we also filmed for our documentary. So it was a great kind of symbiotic relationship. It was an important, and is an important relationship. And we learned doing that there are organizations doing great work in the world who have great stories to tell, who have individuals who work with those organizations who have great stories to tell. And we can help by helping those organizations, and those organizations can help us by getting to the places where the stories need to be told. These partnerships help us tell stories that we want to tell, but it also helps the humanitarian organizations that we work with tell their stories. And we work with everything from teeny tiny little operations like the Northwest Arkansas Rescue of Canines, MSU Care, which provides medical care for homeless and poor people here in Springfield, Missouri, Springfield Community Gardens, the Symphony, the Discovery Center. I mean, we've done a lot of work for nonprofits that provide us a way to do documentary-style storytelling, give students a way to not only practice the craft of video production in the documentary style, but lets them do good work. It costs a lot of money to make even a short film, and while you can do a lot with volunteers and students don't really cost anything, the fact of the matter is that there are costs. There are times you have to shell out money. You have to travel. Well, you know, hotels and gas stations and restaurants are not going to contribute. Oh, we're a documentary film crew and we're nonprofits. No, you got to pay your bills, even if the bills are sometimes not that much. You know, just a dinner for a crew, for example. And so we decided that since we were developing not only as a place for students to learn to make documentary films, but we were developing an expertise of working with nonprofit organizations, it seemed to me a no-brainer to become a nonprofit organization. That allows us to work in concert with other nonprofits in fundraising. So for example, an outfit like Springfield Community Gardens, they needed a video. They wrote us into one of their grants. Okay? And since we're a nonprofit, that's easier, right? Because the granting organization, they can see, oh, you're going to get video help. This amount of money is for video, and the people that are going to be doing it are another nonprofit. So it really helps both with attracting tax-deductible dollars to help us pay for things that need to be paid for as we do this work. But it also makes it easier for nonprofits to use us in making their films, and it makes it less expensive for them as well. What we want to do is provide a place where students who want to learn how to make documentary films can do that. But not just anything. Since we have the humanitarian service component to it, what we want to do is promote the idea of making important stories outside the need to be commercially successful. The skill set for documentary filmmaking, there's large crossover between fiction filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, and between journalism and documentary filmmaking. We have both types of students in our department. And they can learn a lot about really an important career choice. We want to teach students how to do that, how to identify good stories outside of a need to make money, outside that commercial imperative, and have that as a route in to documentary filmmaking in its many guises as a career. We have a couple of student productions going on right now. Actually, both are in post-production and should be finished soon. There's one that's coming up. I don't know that we're settled on the title yet, but it's about drive-in theaters as a kind of a cultural form. At one point in the United States in the early 1960s, there were more than 3,000 of these things across America, and now there are fewer than 350. Whether it's dying or not, I don't know, because I think the coronavirus is changing the fortunes, at least for some drive-in theaters. But that's one that's in post-production now and should be out soon. Another one that we're very excited about is called Songs from the Street. This is going to be another feature-length documentary. It is about the Springfield Street Choir. This is a choir made up of homeless people in Springfield. It is sponsored by a number of different people and organizations, but primarily by the Connecting Grounds, which is a church here in Springfield that caters specifically to the homeless and to the poor. The idea of it isn't that it's supposed to rehabilitate anybody, or isn't that it's supposed to make it easier for them to get jobs, or the idea of it is, as I understand it, is two things. One, an exercise in self-respect and self-worth, and to make homeless people more visible in the public. I mean, if you go to a concert of the street choir, you're sitting in your audience listening, watching homeless people. You cannot escape. You can't cross the street. You can't run away. You can't look away, nor should you. And so the street choir, I think, not only is a great thing for these folks that are a part of it, in terms of their feelings of self-worth, camaraderie, community, but it's forcing the community to see them as neighbors and not just a problem to be avoided. This dual mission of documentary education and humanitarian service, I think, is particularly important because, one, it is teaching students how to tell important stories, teaching them that they can tell, should tell important stories without necessarily worrying about, making a lot of money doing it. That there are stories that need to be told and they can tell them. And working with humanitarian organizations, NGOs, and telling these types of stories plugs them into, since we're also a nonprofit, plugs them into this world of helping their fellow man with the very skills they're learning here in school.